Today's program made possible by patrons like you. Welcome to where we celebrate music from the movies. From the golden age to present day, we've got it all covered. We talk to those in the entertainment industry and find out about their favorite scores. You found the podcast, What's the Score? I'm your host, Frank R. Wilson. So sit back, relax, grab a popcorn, and let's see what we'll be hearing today. Recognize that music? It's one of the favorites of our guest today. And you'll probably know who our guest is because we're going to continue the conversation that we had with our guest from last week, which is session pianist, jazz performer, Mike Lang. Mike, again, my sincere thanks for joining us for this week.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. And part one was a blast, and I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, excellent. My sincere thanks. Before we get into some of the cues and some of the composers you've worked with, I'm kind of curious, because I know of at least 3 major locations where film scores are generally recorded. So I'm kind of curious: has all your work been in Los Angeles, or have you had to travel to other places in order to record film scores?
Well, it's interesting you say, did I have to travel? Because the truth is, being invited to travel, that's like a dream come true for me, to go and work with other musicians in other parts of the world or other parts of the United States. Regrettably, I haven't actually been asked to go to London or some of the other places in Europe to record, which I would be very available and happy to do for all of you people out there who are young filmmakers who
He's on record.
But I have recorded in New York a lot and enjoyed all of it. I worked with a composer named Miles Goodman, who died at a tragically young age, who did a lot of wonderful films and a lot of scores. And one of the people he worked with in a repeated way was Nora Ephron, who's a wonderful writer director, and she lived in New York, and so she would very often want Miles to record in New York, and he would sometimes bring me or bring a few people that he felt were essential to have as specific ingredients on his scores. And I just discovered, I'd forgotten this, but I worked on one of Howard Shore's films that was done in New York, and I'm pretty sure he brought me back there because I don't think we did multiple. I saw the band. I sort of had a realization that some of these people are based in New York, and it looked like it was recorded in New York. And so I'm sure that was great. And then I had a really funny experience going to Toronto with Cliff Idleman. And everything about the recording was good and normal and everything. But when we were back, both at the airport flying back together on the same plane, we were in customs in Toronto. Somehow I had misplaced my passport. And I don't know what Cliff did, but he made it work so that I could get and periodically I'd see him after that, and he'd remind me, he says, I saved your butt in Toronto. I said, yeah. Yes, you did.
Yeah, I've been there before. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So, traveling and getting to working with other musicians and being in other places. I would love to go to Nashville someday and work. There's so much energy there, and it's such a recording mecca for pop music and country music and
True.
the history there is just phenomenal. And I would love to record in London. I was visiting on vacation in London several years ago, and George Fenton, who's a wonderful composer that I used to work for a lot when he was doing films in L.A., he took me to Lyndhurst Studios, and I got to
Mm,
that place, which was a converted church, and it's one of the major film studios in London. And I got to play the German Hamburg Steinway in Studio A
oh, wow.
recording, so I could just kind of soak it in. And it's a beautiful place. And we wanted to go to Abbey Road, but they had closed lockdown sessions. We couldn't visit Abbey Road. I would have loved to visit
Yeah.
that as
Yeah.
well.
So I'm curious because you're known as being a piano player. So I'm going to ask a really ridiculous question because I'm not a musician. Um, does that mean also that there are times not only do you play piano, but you also play, for lack of a better way for a novice like me to say, do you also play quote other keyboard instruments unquote?
Oh my God, that's blasphemy! I could never. Of course, yeah. Well, this is a longer answer than you might expect. Like with all my answers. So you know, as a traditionally trained pianist, I guess I played the piano. And then when I started doing work in the studios, I was sort of, led to believe that I needed to be familiar with certain other instruments. And in the early days, what that really involved was on most kind of conventional sessions that I needed to learn the celeste and I needed to learn the harpsichord. The main thing with learning those instruments is the keyboard feels and reacts differently.
Uh,
Some people have a real issue with that and they really have to work at it. And other people, and I seem to be one of them, just have a natural relationship kind of experience where I figure it out. It's
yeah.
not terribly intellectual. With the harpsichord, they have what are called 4 foot, 8 foot, and 16 foot, which relates to the octave of the sound.
Huh.
So you can combine. There's usually a large harpsichord, which you would find in a film, has a film score orchestra would have two manuals. So the upper manual, you might have the 8 foot, which is concert pitch, doubled with the 4 foot, which is an octave above. So it's called coupling. So you play one note and you're playing octaves, and then you can actually combine the 16 foot with that too. So you could actually be playing three notes, at a total interval of two octaves apart, and play that sort of unison sound. And then there's a lute uh, thing which changes the timbre, so it's no longer sustained, but more of a pluck sound. So it's emulating the sound of a lute guitar type instrument. So
Okay.
that's not a lot to learn. The main thing is to be comfortable with the instrument and understand what it is, and then more involved, we're learning organs. And in the early days, that involved a lot. I mean, the Hammond organ. Some people spend their whole life playing a Hammond B3 organ, and learning how to play jazz vocabulary, R&B vocabulary, gospel vocabulary. Some people learn to play the pedals, which is a whole other technique. And then there are pipe organs, which were in the studios at Fox, and that was the one that stayed the longest because that studio stayed the longest. And finally, Nathan Barr acquired that and put it in his own private studio and rebuilt it. Um,
Wow.
and then there was a pipe organ at Universal, which I played quite a bit. And there was actually one at the old Disney studio. And that involved a lot because then you're dealing with 4 and 5 manuals, a lot of registration, and learning to play, at least to some extent, moving the pedals. Learning, it's a heel toe technique where you go from the white keys to the black keys. And I didn't become an organist. I just became a plumber that could do that as well as something else.
Yeah. No, I understand.
Extent. And then, of course, there were the other instruments that came out of pop music. Wurlitzer electric piano as the Hammond. Then the Fender Rhodes electric piano, which was a whole different sound. And then clavinet, learning to play like rhythmic stuff with a wah-wah pedal. So I got involved in all that stuff. And then eventually synthesizers. And that's a huge topic. And that became a big part of what I did.
Wow. I mean, folks, if you understood half of what he just talked about, you're smarter than I am. A lot of that went above my head. However, I
I do.
appreciate it. I appreciate it because I understand just that, I have an appreciation and understanding of it. But, basically, folks, it went over my head. So that's okay.
Well, let me
It
just
just
say
shows you how talented this man is.
yeah, the one thing that governed all of this for me is uh, what the motivation is for doing what I'm doing. And the motivation for me was to be actively doing it. So then you need to look at what's the marketplace, what's the supply and demand. And if all of a sudden people want keyboard players to do this stuff, you got a choice. Either you decide you want to become immersed in it and participate in the activity, or you want to continue doing what you're doing, understanding that that's becoming not the marketplace that it was. It's becoming only a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I,
Well,
I love all kinds of music for all kinds of reasons, and I'm motivated for whatever I'm motivated for. I love the idea of being excited about something that's new, not for the sake of being excited about it because it's new, but because I actually am turned on by it. It's
yeah.
it's like meeting a new person and finding out you want a new friend. It's just like that.
And we could talk for hours about this, but I am impressed with the fact that you don't just post pop music or scores. You go back to the classics, with Beethoven and Mozart. I mean, you have an appreciation for a wide variety of music, so I love that. But however, having said that, I want to go into the few first cue that we're going to play on part two, and I'm particularly interested in hearing your story behind this because I know that I know that Clint Eastwood has a love of jazz and that he plays piano, and that apparently in his later years, a lot of the films, if not all of them, I'm not sure, but certainly a lot of his later films that he has been a director on, he has also been a composer. So I would love to hear because we're going to play a cue from Bridges of Madison County. Uh, I'd love to hear your experience of working with him on this particular score and how that worked because my understanding is he wrote the score. So talk to us about that.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction because my relationship with and history with Clint Eastwood is personal. It's special, and I was honored to be involved with him on so many things. It's very possible that the Iger sanction that John Williams scored was, if not the first film, one of the first films that I got to work with him on. But where the relationship really had some legs was when Jerry Fielding was working pretty much exclusively for I mean, Clint was using Jerry pretty much exclusively on most of his films up until the time Jerry Fielding died. And so there were many, many films, a lot of piano featured stuff that I did. And then Lala Schifrin did all of the Dirty Harry movies for Clint, and I got to work
Right.
with them. And after Jerry died, Clint started working with Lenny Niehaus, who was one of Jerry Fielding's orchestrators. So then Lenny became the composer, and so I was involved on so many films. And somewhere Clint started getting involved with composing. He had always played the piano, and as a jazz fan, he had always he liked to play blues oriented stuff and boogie woogie. He loved all of that. And just give me one second. I've got to put the password in my computer for some reason. Never done that before. Now it's really taking up my time. Bear with me. Okay. Uh, in fact, I remember there was a movie. I want to say it was one of the ones that Jerry Fielding did, and I can't remember the name of it. But there was a place where he wanted to do like a three piano boogie woogie thing. For any of you who know anything about boogie woogie, and for most of you who don't, there were three classic boogie woogie piano players. There was Albert Ammons, Pete Johnson, and Meadlux Lewis, and they recorded occasionally the three of them together or in groups of two. And some of the classic boogie woogie recordings in the 30s and 40s were done by these guys.
Huh.
So Clint had me and Pete Jolly, who was a wonderful jazz pianist who also did a lot of recording work, and a third piano, and we were going to do this three piano boogie woogie thing, and Clint joined us, and we recorded a three piano boogie woogie thing. And I think that's the first time I remember being in the studio with Clint where he played. So all of this is just a prelude to the Bridges of Madison County.
So,
So
so when all three of you played, it wasn't for that film; it was for something else. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, it was for an earlier film that I
Okay,
think
okay,
Eric Fielding scored, and I mean I could do some research and figure out where it was.
yeah,
But
yeah, that's fine.
yeah, so anyway, I got a call to work on this new film with Clint Eastwood, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even actually know who the composer was, and I came into the studio, and I was the only musician there, and Clint was there, and he says, "Mike, this is going to be like a real experiment." I said, "Okay." And I said, "What's the deal?" And he says, "Well, I have this movie I'm doing." And he says, "I have this thought that we might just do the whole score with solo piano." And
Wow.
he says, "Now I don't know how the studio's going to feel about it or where it's going to end up. This is like an experiment." And he said, he said, "I've written the theme for it." And I said, "Great." And I said, because I didn't see any music anywhere. And I said, "Do you?" Is it written out? I didn't know how to ask him. And he said, "No, I'm going to whistle it to you." Okay. I said, "We need to get some music paper so I can write it down because my memory's not that good." you know. So we got some music paper and he kind of whistled it. And I can't remember if he actually played the piano or just did the whistling. It was a very, very simple melody and very memorable. It really had a thing about it, you know.
Oh yeah, it was a
and
memorable
uh,
song.
and I figured out at the piano the basic chords, which were, you know, it wasn't like I came up with anything at that point. Basically, the melody very explicitly had the chords that he wanted, and I said, "So is this it?" And he said, "Yeah, you got it perfectly." So then he described this to me, and the way we went through the whole film was, uh, he put up each cue, and he would kind of tell me how he wanted me to deal with it using the theme, and we went through the whole thing that way. And he then got Lenny Niehaus involved and added an orchestra. And that's how the Bridges of Madison County came to be the score that it is.
Wow, wow. So
So,
he had no sheet music. He basically hummed it or whistled it to you. What the theme was?
yeah. But I mean, truthfully, the way I played it is very personal. It's not like if somebody else sat down with the melody, it would sound like what I did. But what I did was more as an interpreter and a performer with the melody, and mood setting things that you might call slightly arranged, but not, it was so bare. And so the thing that he really wanted was to have this sort of vulnerability about it, and so it didn't require a lot of ornamentation or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm a fan. I mean, a couple of scores. This one and $1 Million Baby are two that that I remember that I thought the music was spot on, and so kudos to him for that. Well, let's have a listen to this. This is again from the film The Bridges of Madison County. Um our guest does have a role in this. It's a love theme from The Bridges of Madison County. Our guest is Mike Lang, who plays on it, and the composer is Clint Eastwood. Enjoy. One person we've talked a lot about, a composer that I'm not surprised, he's one of my favorites as well, is Jerry Goldsmith. And you had picked out as one of your favorites that you also wanted to feature a cue from the film called The Edge. And this is about the end titles. Tell me a little bit about how that came about and what your memories are of that recording session.
Okay, this was another one of these Jerry Goldsmith. For all of you who heard part one, this is Jerry Goldsmith part two, and it's got a Jerry Goldsmith, Mike Lang kind of vibe to it. I did. I just looked up, and I wanted to make a mention of the fact that I had the honor and the good fortune of working with Jerry on 46 films, and fairly soon after he and I got to know each other. Uh, we did a movie called Runaway, I think it was called, and it was basically all like a synthesized orchestra. There were a lot of budget problems, and he had to do it without a real orchestra. And so he called me in to read his pencil sketches from all elaborate scores. And there was something about that kind of really cemented something between us. And he started hiring me on a regular basis. And so at the end of the day, 46 wonderful projects with him, really a lot. But they were filled with interesting things that would happen. So, The Edge is a movie with, let's see, it was Anthony Hopkins and you remember who else was in it? I'm blanking.
I don't offhand know.
Yeah, it was about two guys who hated each other and wanted to kill each other, and they were in the wilderness, and a bear was trying to eat them for dinner, so they had to learn how to get along. And it's an amazing film. And the score that Jerry wrote was very orchestral and very real and human feeling. And so we had 4 days to record. And on the third day, he came up to me. He says, "Mike, I need to talk to you." So, okay. I said, "What's up?" And he said, "The director likes jazz." And he said it, kind of with an attitude. And I said, "Well, that's nice." He said, "So here's what we're going to do." He said, "For the end title, we're going to use my theme and just record it with you and a rhythm section. And it'll be just a jazz trio version of the theme." And I'm now like starting to internally tremble, wondering, well, Jesus Christ, I'm going to need a moment to take this thing and figure out a jazz approach and probably reharmonize it and give it a jazz vocabulary. It's a very filmatic theme that is not going to have any of that built into it. So I thought, okay, we're going to be back with the orchestra tomorrow. I said, "Jerry, can you just give me a sketch of the all I need is a melody and the harmony or so forth, and let me take it home and let me kind of figure it out for jazz trio, and can we do it tomorrow?" He said, "What are you talking about?" Well, I said, "I thought I was clear." and he said, "We're going to record it when this 10-minute break is over." And I'm like, but and he said, "Mike," he says, "You're brilliant. It's not going to be any better if you go home. It'll be great. Just do it." So I then went to the music librarian and I got a copy of the thing, and it was only 16 bars long. It wasn't like a fully developed song or anything. It wasn't a lot of material. And I thought, well, how can I possibly get this into any shape, without writing additional material, which I'm sure he was not interested in having me do. How do I make this work? And then I thought, and I was figuring out the chords to the main part of it. And I thought, okay, I got the chords and this is going to work. It's going to be okay. And I thought, well, if I just go to the dominant tonality of a key we're in and just build tension. And I was thinking of using kind of suspended fourth chords, kind of like the way McCoy Tyner harmonized a lot of stuff with John Coltrane. I thought, and then I can go back to the A section. It'll have a balance and maybe it'll slide by and it'll be okay, and so we came back from the break. I think it took a little more than the 8 minutes that were left to me to get it done. And it was Chuck DeMonico and Steve Schaefer who played so well. And Bruce Botnick, the engineer, set us up so we were right close to each other. And we did two performances of it. And quite frankly, and I guess I'm on the record saying this, I wasn't really happy with my playing. I didn't feel like I had a chance to really become familiar with it in the way that I wanted to. And I was kind of frustrated by the whole thing. And And I remember when we finished the fourth day, I don't even think I said goodbye to him, which was not normal for me. I just was kind of
Mm.
bugged. And so, I mean, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because 2 years later, I got a call from some guy who said, "Man, I just want to tell you that music that you did at the end of that movie, I bought the soundtrack album." And he said, "It's just amazing the way the trio sounds." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. They actually used that stuff in the movie?" Because I
Yeah.
would never make the final cut. He said, "Oh yeah, it's on a record and everything. It's fantastic." So I went out and I got the CD, and I then went and saw the movie or found a way to see it, and I learned something from that because everything that I felt was really not so great about it had vanished, and I thought, okay, I guess he was right. I guess I was capable of doing this, and I guess I can feel okay about it. So I'm
Yeah.
feeling so okay about it. I'm letting you share it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it brings to mind a question. I'm curious, knowing what little I know about Hollywood. I mean, I'm also an actor. I'm in the industry, so I kind of understand how things work. But I'm kind of curious. Has it ever bothered you that, because what I'm hearing a theme from all your stories. The theme being, what do you think, Mike? What do we need to change? How can we make it better? And Mike comes up with suggestions, and they approve what Mike does. But I'm not sure Mike gets credit for that. Did, I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly, but I
Well,
guess a couple of questions. One, does that bother you? And two, I mean, what do you? There's nothing you can do about it, I guess.
well, here's the real answer about that, which is there's a dividing line when you get involved creatively as to what your actual role is, and it just depends on your perspective. If you look at jazz musicians, they go in and they play, let's say, body and soul, and they play the melody for 32 bars, and then they play four choruses of their improvisations on body and soul. Well, those are really, from a classical point of view, variations on a theme, and they should be getting maybe 60 or 80% of their performance royalties as composers, and that's never been the case. So some jazz musicians later, people like Charlie Parker and Bud Powell and people from the bebop era, they love the harmonizations of these classic songs, so they wrote their own melodies. You know,
Okay.
so so you have a tune called "Scrapple from the Apple" that Charlie Parker wrote, and he played that instead of the original song that it was based on, and so then it was his composition. So that was a way to get around that. Um, I try and be flexible but true to myself. So if I feel like I'm just adding the creative contribution that an arranger or a performer would add, I don't feel that I have any right to. That's my job. I figure that's why I'm being hired, because maybe I'm doing something in a way they rather have me there than have someone else there, or maybe they
Yeah.
have someone else there rather than me there, because we all can bring something different. And when it really gets to the point where I feel it's crossing that line, I do have the conversations, and I do try and get a fair kind of recognition for what my contribution is.
Yeah.
And I have to say, in having done this for over 50 years, most of the time it's been very appropriate. Whatever is due to
Okay. Okay.
people, very generous and willing to do the right thing.
Well, let's have a listen to Mike's work on the end titles for a film called The Edge, written by composer Jerry Goldsmith. The next film we wanted to highlight is a film called Gattaca. The composer that worked on this was Michael Nyman, and I guess you had an interesting role on this particular score. So I was curious if you could talk to us a little bit about recording this particular score and the story behind it.
So, in relationship to Michael Nyman and Gattaca, which is an amazingly futuristic film by an English director, Andrew Nichols. If anybody can find it, if it's still out there, it was Columbia Pictures 1997. I just found it a fascinatingly attractive, interesting movie. So we're in the future and we're in the area of fantasy. And for those of you who don't know, Michael Nyman actually started out as a classical music reviewer and transformed himself into one of the most important minimalist classical composers to come out of England. In the same era generation that produced John Adams and Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and he had his own take on it and wrote some amazing music, and then eventually started emerging as a really original film composer who's done a lot of interesting films. And so this was an opportunity to work with him in Los Angeles, and the film and the score are really, I don't know if there's an album out there, but I think somewhere on YouTube you can find it. What this was a an odd situation where you have this futuristic person who's probably not even a human. He's something else. I'm not sure exactly about that. But he had 12 fingers instead of 10 fingers. And the whole idea of this is that he's playing a known piece of music, which in this case was one of Schubert's Moments Musicaux, musical moments, with suite of piano music. But you're hearing extra notes because he's using extra fingers. So right in the middle of doing all of his score, there was a moment where they had licensed or they had gotten a student at UCLA had recorded the Schubert piece the way it was written, and they wanted me to overdub and add what the sixth finger on the left hand and right hand would be playing in addition to what Schubert wrote. And,
Wow.
and Michael Nyman just figured he'd let me do it with the director. So he took himself out of the loop. And so I'm working with Andrew Nichols, and he said, "Well, what do you think?" And I think they had the music there for me to relate to. And I immediately had this idea, and I said, "Look, there's an experiment, but I think if I just play what a sixth finger could reach wouldn't be that much far away from the rest of the hand. I don't think orally you would have anything that unusual to have as ear candy. I said, so what I want to do is I want to experiment using the six fingers being more extended. So the lower hand, the sixth finger would be much lower than the rest of it and much higher on the right hand. So you really hear that it's altered and that it's different.
Huh.
And I said, if it's too severe, we could, but I just sort of think that would be worth trying. He said, I love that idea. Let's try it. So I did. I think I did each hand separately. I can't remember. And I also, I think, went a little beyond the traditional Schubert vocabulary. I'm not sure how intentional that was, but I just I don't remember exactly how it sounds, but it's very noticeably altered. And I just want to put a postscript in here, and I'm going to pause for a second, and you can put it anywhere.
Okay.
One of the things that I want to say about all of the examples that I've selected for this wonderful opportunity that I have here with Frank is I've picked things where I've been asked to do things that are out of the ordinary. In other words, it would be very easy to pick a score and say, okay, here's a nice score by so and so, and I played the music, and this is the way he wrote it, and this is the way I played it. And 90% of the things that I've done are probably in that category, but they aren't particularly any different than what another pianist would do in that situation, other than my sound is my sound and my emotions are my emotions. So what I thought would be more interesting would be these sort of insightful exceptions to the rule where I had to step out and do something that's a little bit more noticeable. So
Well said. Well said. All right. Well, let's have a look at listen to this. This is again from the film Gattaca, written by Michael Nyman. and it doesn't feature an impromptu performance by our guest Michael Lang with it's well. Listen to the previous story; that'll explain it better than I can. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. We'll get back to our program in a minute. This program is done for the love of film and film music, plain and simple. However, it does take a huge investment in time and in fees for me to make the program work for you. I don't sell commercial time and don't really want to on this program. Rather, I'm kind of like a public broadcasting station. I need support from listeners like you. For as little as $3 a month, you can help me offset the time spent in putting the program together. Or maybe you just think of it as leaving a tip in the tip jar. Either way, if you can join up, there will be bonuses, like an additional 10 to 15 minute segment with our guest every week. Well, we'll play additional cues as well as ask some extra questions. And it's going to be only available to patrons. How do you sign up? Well, it's simple. You go to patreon.com/what's the score, and that's all one word. That's Patreon, that's patreon.com/what's the score. Check it out. We'd be grateful for your support. That's patreon.com. Another cue and a score that you wanted to highlight was a film called The Rainmaker, written by the score is written by Elmer Bernstein, and you have obviously a solo or a very important part on this where you play the organ. So I'm just kind of curious if you could tell us a little bit about the story behind recording this particular score.
Thank you. Yes. First of all, a little introduction. Elmer Bernstein is someone I've known since I was a teenager, and he was always somebody who encouraged me to be a musician. And eventually, I had the opportunity. I think the first times I got to work with him was when he was doing some television at Universal, and then eventually I started doing movies with him, and had so many wonderful experiences with him. A very special human being, and a very, I think, I mean, he was a big guy as far as being a big composer, historically speaking. He's there. But I don't know if people ever stop to realize how many different kinds of genres his career spanned.
Mm.
And he told me that he felt he was like a composer with nine lives. He says, Mike, he says, people thought of me as a drama writer, and then all of a sudden they thought of me as a Western writer. Then they thought of me as a comedy writer. They thought of me as this and of that. He says, and I've had this incredibly long career based on all of these kind of stylistic chapters, So, so this movie is called John Grisham's The Rainmaker. For some reason, he felt like he wanted to have his name on the title of the movie. Maybe there were some other Rainmakers. I don't know, but so I got there, and unusually, I was playing the Hammond B3 exclusively on this film. There was another pianist who was playing, Randy Kerber, and his role was just very simple piano stuff in the orchestra, which he played beautifully. But there were two featured instruments. One was a Hammond B3, and the other was solo trumpet that Warren Looning played, and one of the most brilliant musicians in the history of film music, Laura Warren was. And he played beautifully on this film. So Elmer had this kind of how can I put it, a playful way of saying things. So he came up to me and said, Mike, he said, I just want you to know something. I said, yes, Elmer, what is it? He said, I wrote out every note of your organ parts. And I said, okay, great. He said, I don't want you to play any of those notes. So he said, it'll give you the harmonic language, and then he says, here's the deal. He said, I've written a very Americana Copland-esque score.
Okay, yep.
And he said, you are supposed to be a Southern African American kind of gospel organist. He said, I never want you to reference what I've written for orchestra in terms of what you play. You should never be hybrid. You should never sound like you're part anything other than what you are. It's like you're completely separate. You should only sound like that guy, like the black church guy in the local Louisiana church or wherever.
Wow.
And I said, okay, I understand it, and I hope I'll be able to deliver. And as it turned out, I was really comfortable with the role. And what was fun for me about it, I'm just remembering this for the first time in a long time. The way unlike a gospel organist that would not necessarily play like a lot of solo notey kind of things, the way it interacted with the orchestra, it was almost like I felt like it needed to be like recitative in an aria, in an opera, with a lot of notes, a lot of elaboration in order to give it life, because it was very sustained. So I felt like the organ can't just do that. It needs to find a place to be a part, not only stylistically, but in terms of the texture. So I started thinking, again, I didn't have the words for this. I figured it out later, and I wanted to be able to go like that, real vocal kind of, but blues vocabulary. And then it struck me, I need to play like a lead guitar player, like Jimi Hendrix or something. I needed that, but in the gospel language. So that's kind of where I went with it. And early on, I was introduced to Francis Ford Coppola. and he was really just very happy with what we were doing, and so it was a fantastic experience. There was one funny element which I'll tell you, which is not relevant to this performance, but there was one cue in the movie that was comedic, and there's sort of a trick you can do with the Hammond B3. It has percussive stops that bring in the upper harmonics, the third and the fifth harmonic above in the second octave, and that's where you get this percussive sound that a lot of people have as a color choice with the Hammond B3. Jimmy Smith, who's a prominent B3 player, is known for his use of percussion in the sound of what he plays, and many other guys.
Yeah.
But there's a trick, which is if you eliminate or almost eliminate the drawbars that are producing the basic sound, you just hear the percussion thing, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, well, this is a comedic moment. Maybe this would be cool, So I played it, and we were on a break, and there's a playback going on, and it's featuring this sound. And Coppola says, "Stop the music! Stop the music!" He said, "What's that percussion sound?" And he said it like that, and I said, Francis, that's the organ. It's a kind of. I thought the mood was comedic, so I thought it might be cool to do that. He said, "I hate that." He said, "We don't have to have it." He said, so, so the percussion comedic sound is nowhere to be found. But anyway, it was a wonderful kind of special moment in my life, being able to do that kind of thing in a film, and to do it with such a wonderful movie. I mean, what a special movie that is.
Yeah. Gosh, there's a couple of questions I want to ask in relation to that story.
Okay.
First one is you as a composer, and I guess as someone who's contributing heavily to what's being recorded, such as yourself. My gosh, you got to have a thick skin. It sounds like to me.
Why?
Well, I mean, people are saying that's not right. That's horrible. That's crap. I mean, let's do it again. Let's do it different. That's got to be, hey, I thought I did really great. I mean, all of a sudden you say it's crap. I mean,
No, but I go the other way. It's like, great. What do we need to do next? I mean,
okay.
being creative is a process in time. It's not an event. What ends up is the event, but the creative process is the creative part. That's the fun part. That's the experimentation part. I mean, truthfully, it can be horrible for a composer who has deadlines, and all of a sudden, and maybe there's no money, and the composer's working for no money, and the director keeps wanting you to rewrite, and it's not fun anymore. But I'm just there. I'm going home in 3 hours, and it's like, what do you want me to do? And the truth is, it's much more useful, just from a practical standpoint, to wrap your head around the challenge and go to that unknown place to see what else is inside of you that can come out. I mean, if I were to fight it, nothing good would come out of it.
That's an excellent response, and that makes total sense.
Yeah, not to say that in over 50 years of doing this stuff, I haven't had days where I hate it.
I'm sure, yeah.
Right, and there have been days when the people I've worked for have not been happy with me. It happens, One thing that happens that's really weird, but I learned so much from it, is the most important thing you can do as a musician, and if you're exposed and if you have a identification, is if you can make the person you're working for feel like, oh, Mike's here, it's going to be okay. If you can make somebody have that confidence, that's worth more than any specific performance you can give them. And that just leads the door for positive things, opens the door for positive things to happen.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough.
If I can say something to Francis like, oh, cool, what can we do now? That makes him feel good. Then he might not even know that he didn't like what I gave him, but he probably liked it at the moment because I made him feel good about it. Anything is possible. Anything is possible.
Yeah. Let's have a listen to this cue that Mike has chosen for us. This is from John Grisham's The Rainmaker. It sounds to me, as I'm looking at this note, the cue is called Sharks, which features our guest, Mike Lang, on the Hammond B3 organ. And of course, the cue is written by the composer for the film, Elmer Bernstein. finally, as we look at some of your favorites, and I will remind our audience, if you're a patron, you're going to hear some more favorites of Michael as we go along, but this will be the final thing we're going to listen to on the regular podcast today. I'm talking about a film called Dreamer, where the score is written by John Debney. Tell me a little bit about your experience on recording that particular score.
Okay, I would like to start to just say that John Debney is one of the composers that I feel a really special bond to. I've known John for decades. I think I probably met him when he was doing a lot of television shows, and then as his career expanded and he started becoming more and more in demand as an eventual A-list composer, I got to do so many things with him. And the thing I'd like to say about John is that there's some composers that have a very specific sound, like John Barry, for instance, and they have an identification of doing something in a way that nobody else does. And that's one kind of film composing talent. And then another kind of composing talent is somebody who's really diverse, and as a musician who's kind of diverse, I really get it, where it's like a composer comes in and says, what do you want? Do you want this or do you want that? And what is and they just completely go into the film and figure it out and do exactly what that is. I don't think there's any kind of film John Debney wouldn't deliver a totally appropriate and fantastic product for. And
Huh.
the nicest guy in the world. He is so professional and so together. He has a real understanding of the music side of it, of the people side of it, about how to communicate, about how to make musicians comfortable, how to make a director comfortable. He's like born to this world to be this. And I feel so honored to know him and to be able to do so many different things for him. I picked this.
There's much more to you've highlighted to my thinking a key issue. There's much more to this than talent. It truly is. There's much more to this than talent. You have to be able to network well. You have to be able to uh, uh, get along with people well. Be personable. Be open. I mean, there's lots of skills that are involved of being successful in this industry. Would that be safe to say?
It would be more than safe to say. I mean, uh, I have made this comment, and it is a bit. What's the word? Well, it's like saying thing in a really crude way, but the truth is, again, it goes back to my earlier comment about making somebody feel comfortable. Um,
Yeah,
Richard Kraft, who to me is one of the most amazing people in the film music world, because he's not only
absolutely.
a great agent, but he has such an understanding. He could produce a movie, he could direct a movie. Probably, there's nothing this guy couldn't do. He gets it from all sides, and he brings that into his network of managing composers and so forth. And he recently posted like 10 things that were important to being a composer, and only some of them had to do with delivering music. and
Yeah,
and I feel, just based on that, if you can make a director feel comfortable, if you can make someone feel, you go in and have a meeting and the director walks away, and it's not a result of anything you've written, it's a result of how you communicated, and the director says, this guy really understands my movie is going to be successful because he's attached to it, it's going to help, I want him on my team. That's
yeah.
kind of where I'm going back to with John. He's so good at that. Now,
John.
Debney.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, getting back to Dreamer, the reason I picked this, um, one thing that I'm glad about is this is the one thing that I picked that hang on, my computer just expressed a need for a password. Okay. Uh, um, I'm glad, because this is the only example, I think, where it's really me playing a piano solo that's a theme for the movie, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty much exactly as he wrote it. There might be an inflection here or there, but it's basically me playing as a interpretive pianist, playing a written part for a film on a main theme. But that's not why I picked it. I picked it because it was so odd the way the thing went down. So I do remember that the way this worked, I think, was that John created mock-ups of the film by recording everything, with synthesized and sampled sounds, and then it would be probably would be transcribed by the music librarian and then delivered to the orchestrator. And if I'm not mistaken, Brad Dector, who's a dear friend of mine, and on a completely separate note, wrote a wonderful jazz piano concerto for me. So I want to express my thanks to Brad Dector, who's one of the most appreciated orchestrators in film music and a wonderful talent of his own. So anyway, getting back to this, something got screwed up where the music itself is a simple waltz melody, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's
Okay.
almost kind of Randy Newman-esque in a way. It has a slightly, I don't know if I could say country, but maybe slightly country feel to it and so forth. And it's a lyric waltz thing. It got notated so that the meter of it, to read the music, it had nothing to do with what the intention of the music was to be. So I'm reading the music and it's not in 3/4, it's in 4/4 or whatever, how it was notated. And I had to play this thing. It's sort of like saying, okay, you have to play a piece of music and you have to read it, but you have to do it with your eyes closed. Because what I had to do was not imagine that it was in 3/4 or I would have gotten lost. So I just played it like a robot, but tried to play it with a warm feeling, but it wasn't the feeling relating to the pulse of the music.
Huh.
And there was no time to reconfigure it. And the whole orchestra was written that way, but it wasn't critical for them because they were just playing sustained passages. They didn't have any rhythmic responsibility, so to speak.
Okay.
So the way this worked was that I played it and I had no sense of what I was doing. And so I'd go in the booth and I'd be listening to it and I'm looking around the room waiting for people to say, it sounds wooden or it doesn't, and everybody's kind of listening to it and digging it. And John knew what the problem was because I had asked him if there's a way to solve it, and there wasn't a way without wasting a lot of time. And so when it was all over, I said, John, is this okay? Does this feel like the emotional vibe and everything? He says, sounds great. But I couldn't feel it, And but anyway, it ended up being just fine, and you'll hear it. And I don't think you'll hear anything that indicates that I had this kind of complexity. And then the other thing I was tickled about is he wasn't at the recording sessions, but I ended up getting to play with Joshua Bell because they added him as the violin soloist in the movie.
Yeah. Okay. Well, excellent. Well, let's have a listen to this. This is from the film Dreamer. It's the main title that features on piano our guest Michael Lang, and it's written by composer John Debney. One of the things I've loved about our conversation is the classic phrase that is always talked about filmmaking, that filmmaking is a collaborative process.
Right.
That lots of people always contribute to the final product, and your stories have certainly confirmed that even when it comes to film music, the composer may have one vision, but some of them at least are willing to say, "What do you think? And how can we make this better?" And it sounds to me like you've had the great opportunity to do that. Would that be a safe summation?
Um, I've had plenty of opportunities. I mean, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 things I think we've gone through today, plus the stuff from my Mancini album, and I'm sure there are others. And I'm gonna have to figure out something for your bonus people. But the bulk of the work, I would say, doesn't have these kind of magical stories attached to it. These are the highlights of things that for me were so significant because they were about something. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, very often, I mean, you go in and you do the job, and the whole idea is you're going to record 5 minutes of music, and it's going to be usable, and you're going to go home, and somebody may or may not say thank you, and you get paid for your time. I mean, it is a laboring organization, and people get hired to come in and do a job. And up until recently, there was no guarantee of even having a film credit. I was very shocked when I joined Facebook that so many people wanted to be my Facebook friend because they knew of my professional work, and I had no idea there was that much visibility attached to it. I was gratified.
Yeah. Well, I got news for you, friend. There's a lot of people that know who you are and what you've done.
Well,
So, and take great pride in that. Which leads me to my next question: If there is there, for those people that haven't listened to the episode one or just are curious, is there anything they need to pay attention to? Something you've got coming down the pike, or ways they can stay in touch with what you've got going on currently, or what you've had done in the past? Is there
well,
anything you pass along to them?
I would say one thing. It's a little bit obscure to say it verbally, but maybe you can pass it along somehow because I've sent this to you, which is the 2 video links of a jazz concert that I did
Yes.
in this summer of 2019 by a company called a concert group called Pianospheres. And I did a concert that's a combination of solo piano playing and playing with bass and drums. And I talk about all of the stuff. It's very autobiographical, and some of it is film music, and some of it is my music, and some of it is material from the Great American Songbook, and some of it is material by famous jazz composer instrumentalists.
And for our patrons, we will talk a great deal about that in one of our bonus episodes. I can promise you that.
Okay, we need to get some more patrons out there.
There you go. Thank you, pal.
You're welcome.
but there's no website or anything like that. But as I recall from our previous conversations, so
No,
if any of you are interested in asking Mike a question or understanding what's going on, feel free to contact us at the What's the Score Facebook page, which is fine. I'll be able to get word to Mike and he can respond to you. And also, look on iTunes, perhaps on Amazon as well, for his album of Mancini tunes, Days of Wine and Roses. Please check that out because those are his interpretations of some of the classic themes that were done by Henry Mancini. And so I would highly encourage you to do that. Mike, what can I say? I mean, you've been an amazing guest, and I know you've put in a lot of time into this. I'm most grateful for it. I know my listeners are going to be excited about listening about your behind the scenes stories on all these scores. So my thanks to you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Frank, and it's great to get to know you and to become more familiar with what you're doing, and that you have such a vibrant audience. So, and it's just been wonderful for me to re-experience all of this stuff in having the interviews. It's been fabulous.
Oh, thanks. That it's going to sound corny, but that really means a lot to me. It really does. It really does. I'm still a giddy. What can I say? I'm a giddy. What's the word? Doggone it. I'm like an over-the-top fan or something, and so I've heard a lot of your work, and so I'm just really grateful and excited to be able to talk to you. So thanks again for joining us. Our guest has been Mike Lang, who has played on well over 2,000 scores, some of which we've been able to highlight today. I hope you've enjoyed that. My thanks to him, as well as all our patrons who are supporting the program. And I guess there's only one thing left to say, and that's simply this. My name is Frank R. Wilson. My time's up. I thank you for yours. Thanks for listening to What's the Score?